Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, CRV Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate the support on all of our recent content. We've been moving rather quickly through our off-season segments, and we appreciate all the support on that as well. And just a reminder, our interview with KJ McDaniels is up and out and has been out for, I think, about a week or so. So please be sure to check that out. And before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe as per usual, and follow us on Instagram and X at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yes. All right. So we're going to start our next team in the last division of the Western Conference,
Mm-hmm.
right? Northwest Division.
Yep.
And that's the Oklahoma City Thunder, right?
Sir.
So this was one of the kind of surprise teams of the league last year, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, last year they took Chet Holmgren, right, number 2 overall. But then obviously in the offseason, right, he was in a program game, and then he hurt his foot, I believe, right? And
Yes, you're right.
yeah, basically was out for the whole season. Didn't
Yeah.
play at all. Didn't play a lick. Didn't play a
Nope.
single minute of NBA basketball. So that was pretty rough. And most of us, myself included, kind of assumed that they were going to go into a tanking mode. Just because again they lost their number 2 pick, so it didn't feel like there was much of a reason to realistically compete. But they ended up being a lot better, than we expected. I mean, they were competitive for a playoff pretty much the entire season.
Yeah.
And I believe they ended up finishing as the 10th seed, right?
Yes.
So
If we're looking at the standings, they finished at the 10th seed, and then I think they won in the play-in. If I'm not,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
and they finished with a 40-42 record, so not
Yeah,
too bad from them at all.
right, exactly. They went 40-42. Won the first play-in game down to the wire, I believe, against New Orleans, and then they lost the second play-in game in a blowout, right? So they ended up finishing, I guess, as the 9th seed, but still, right? Not at all bad. For a team that again we had very little expectations for, right? And a lot of that was due to the play of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, right? He basically was, a superstar MVP level, right? All NBA type candidate last year,
Yes.
right? Averaged over 30 a game, right? 31 a game, 5.5 assists, 1.6 steals, 1 block a game, over 50% from the field, right? Efficient pretty much all across the floor, right? From three, 34.5%, so not amazing, right? But great from mid range. Gets to the free throw line a ton, right? Got
Yes.
11 free throws a game. So clearly establishing himself as one of the best young guards in the league, right? 6'6", right? So he's got great size for that point guard spot. But again, we can't forget about the rest of the players on the team, right? You also have Josh Giddey,
Mm-hmm.
right? His backcourt partner, right? Who was also a lottery pick, or yeah, himself out of
Yes.
Australia, right? 6th pick overall, from Oklahoma or for Oklahoma City,
Mm-hmm.
right? A 6'8" guard, basically, right?
He's a
And
cheat
again,
code.
yeah, exactly. Can do a lot of different things, right? Average 16 and a half a game, 6 assists, right? So obviously a great passer, playmaker.
Yes.
Also average 8 rebounds a game, right? So which is really good for a guard. 48 from the field, 32 and a half from 3. So obviously, you can kind of see, right, the sort of weakness, I guess, of that backcourt is neither guy is like a great 3-point shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly Giddy's like a low attempt 3-point shooter, but
But they're
either
so
way,
young.
exactly, right? But they're so young, right? Shea is 25, right? So in theory, he should still be getting better, right? And then Josh Giddey is 20. So I mean, I think soon to turn 21 within the next month
Yes.
or so. So I mean, pretty much, you got an extremely young backcourt, but also just an extremely young team in general, right? Basically, almost everybody on the team, was incredibly young, aside from a handful of guys, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
you also have some other real standouts, right? Jalen Williams, honestly, both of them. So there's two.
Yes.
There's Jalen Williams, the guard, right? J.A. Williams, right? Out of Santa Clara, right? He had a great rookie season as well. I believe this draft pick came from the Clippers, right? In that Paul George trade.
Mm-hmm.
He averaged 14 a game, 4.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.4 steals, right? 36 from three, right? Over 50 from the field. Very good athlete. Um, and again, 22 years old, right? So also relatively young. So I mean, again, then you move over to the other Jalen Williams, right? He was their starting center, right? Kind of their replacement, big, to fill in for Chet for most of the year, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he averaged 6 points, 5 rebounds. So not like amazing numbers, right? But still, right? You could see from his play he was relatively impactful.
Yeah.
But, again, after you factor that in, right now, obviously he moves to more of a backup big role, right? And then you throw Chet Holmgren in there, right? And obviously, he's kind of projected to be a pretty versatile all around big, right? He's got, really good length, right? Over 7 feet, obviously, but he's very thin, right? Um, while he was out, they've said he's put on, 10, 12 pounds of muscle. So
Oh
that's
boy,
obviously,
here we go.
yeah, exactly. So we've always heard, did get a chance to see him in Summer League.
Yes, we did.
And if you haven't seen the Summer League stuff, check it out. It was a lot of great content.
Yes.
He did look stronger, right? He looked much more confident, going to the rim, finishing around the basket. And he's got some good moves around the basket as well. He moves very well for a guy that size.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he's also a really good rim protector, shot blocker, as well, which, you wouldn't think so, just, but again, he's over 7 feet with long arms, really good timing, really good instincts defensively. So that's something obviously that they missed last year, right? Because again, like their centers last year were pretty small and weren't really like traditional centers, right? Again, the other Jalen Williams, like I think he was under 6'10",
Yes,
right?
he
So not
was.
very tall. Dario Saric was also another backup center, right? Basically 6'9", 6'10". Um, and neither guy is like a traditional center, right? Especially again, like, everyone else is pretty tall relative for their positions, right? Shea is pretty big for a point guard. Josh Giddey's pretty big for a two guard. But regardless, you know, adding some more size, right, definitely is going to help them, in those areas, right? You have another, a couple other guys, right? Usman Jang, right? That was another one of their picks that I think they got from the Knicks. I think that was traded on draft day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of, was up and down his rookie year, but he looked really good in the summer league. So, you kind of project him to probably have more of a role. Um, right? They just drafted Cason Wallace as well, right? He looked very good in the summer league, right? And he's gonna, I think, probably be a pretty decent part of their rotation, right? Again, as a backup guard.
Yeah.
He can play both ends of the floor really well. Then you have other wings and forwards, right? Kenrich Williams, who, helped them out a lot. He got hurt towards the second half of the year, right? But when he's out there, he does a lot of things. He can rebound well, passes well, um, can hit, I guess, open threes fine. You got Alexis Pokashevsky, right, who was kind of like a gamble pick for them. And,
Mm-hmm.
there were times where he looked pretty raw. But then
Yeah.
there's other times where you can kind of see, I guess, some of the talent. I'm curious to see what his role is going to be going into next season. Other guards, right? Isaiah Joe, right? He was a guy that was basically out there as a 3-point specialist, shot, incredibly well. I think was one of the league leaders, if not the league leader in 3-point percentage last year.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, so they have, a decent amount of talent to work with. Um, it's all just about it, coalescing and just, continuing to develop. They even got a guy over from the EuroLeague, right?
Yeah.
Vasily J. Micic, I
Yep.
think is, maybe I butchered that, probably did, but regardless, right? I'm in fairness, I don't know much about him, but he did come over from, overseas to join Oklahoma City, so I would imagine he would get minutes. They wouldn't just sign him just to sign him.
Right.
Um,
He's making
but
a
now,
decent chunk of money too. So.
yeah, exactly, and it's kind of interesting, right? Because you look at their strengths, right? We mentioned, now with Chet, you got more size, you got really good athletes, you got length. Um, so with all that, you should be better defensively, right? They have guys who are good shooters, that can knock down open shots.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they have a couple of vets right out there. I forgot to mention Victor Oladipo. I don't know if he'll be there long term, and I think he's going to start the season off injured, if I'm not mistaken. Right, he got hurt while he was in Miami, right in that playoff series against the Bucks. But he could also just be one of those salary filler guys.
Right.
It's just we don't know because again, like Oklahoma City's kind of been used as that. Right, Davis Bertans, right? They traded for on draft day.
Yes.
And they kind of used that and just kind of ate his salary, right? They swapped first round picks, I think. So they gave Dallas their pick, and then Dallas gave them their pick, and then they also took on Davis Bertans' contract.
And then
So
they did something similar. I think what was it with? I might be completely just not in the loop with this, but I think they did something similar to Patty Mills, if I'm not mistaken, right?
like
But I
Patty,
think they did some. They what
reroute-
waived him or something?
they rerouted him.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was.
I think he's in Atlanta now, so
Right.
they rerouted him. Um, yeah, exactly. And again, we talked about this because we had a subscriber, right, or a follower who's like a big Oklahoma City fan.
Yeah. I
And
think his name
exactly,
was the Homelander or something like that. I
yeah, it
think
was
I
the
think it was
home.
something like that.
Yeah, it was the Homelander,
Yeah.
and he was kind of asking about like or kind of I guess asking our thoughts of like could they get anybody in free agency, and my thought was probably like nah, because they're not really a team that historically gets free agents,
Right.
so they kind of took the route that some of those other teams did, right, where they just took on contracts.
Right.
Um, but now they were in kind of a strange spot because they had a ton of players on the roster, right? And you have to get your roster down to I think 15 by opening night. And
Mm-hmm.
so they the last few weeks or whatever they've been cutting guys, right? Like
Yep.
Rudy Gay was on this roster. He was from I think Atlanta, initially Utah, right, and then was traded and rerouted. And they cut him, right? They waived his salary. I think he was in the last year of his deal. They also recently waived a couple of young guys that they got over from Houston, Ty Washington, and Usman Garuba, right? So they got
Mm-hmm.
rid of those guys. So those guys are going to be free agents and free to kind of go elsewhere. Um, and that's kind of one of the downsides, that we've talked about, of having so many draft picks is like at a certain point, you can't keep everybody. You got to get rid of somebody. And, Oklahoma City still has roster spots that they're going to have to get rid of. And I do kind of wonder, who else, they're going to, cut because that is kind of something to think of because it could be, one of these guys who's like, could be a decent player that could help out somebody, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
we basically mentioned, right? SGA, Trey Man, I believe, uh, Micic, Case Wallace. That's four guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those guards. Josh Giddey, Oladipo, Isaiah Joe, Andrew Wiggins. That's eight guys. Lugwent Dort, we didn't even mention, right? Who's
Right.
kind of the 3-and-D wing, even though
Specialist.
he's
Yeah.
undersized, but he's very strong, kind of
Mm-hmm.
big for his height, plays bigger than his height. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, Lugwen Stort, Usman Jiang, Jack White, who's also on the roster, right? That's already 11 guys, basically. Then Jalen Williams, Davis Bertans, Kenrich Williams, Pokashevsky. Is Jeremiah Robinson Earl? I think he's still on the team,
I
right?
believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, again, and then Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams, right? So
Yeah.
we're
Did you
basically,
mention Trey Mann too?
yeah, I did
Okay. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a stacked roster in my opinion, but
You're
there
basically
somebody's
talking,
got to go though.
yeah. So you're talking about 18 guys, I think. So you still have to cut three more.
Right.
So now I do kind of wonder who that might be. Like, if I had to guess, probably like Jack White, Robinson Earl, and then for that last one, maybe it could be Oladipo. I don't know, but like, it's just kind of hard to guess. But like, I'm feeling like because I think all three of those are like expiring contracts or like relatively inexpensive
Mm-hmm.
contracts, and they're probably just not going to be like rotational guys.
Right.
If I had to guess.
I
So
agree.
so if they're not going to be rotational guys, that's I guess kind of a semi weakness of the roster. You might just be kind of like dumping somebody who's good. But, obviously I mentioned the other weaknesses, right? Again, obviously youth, which is not necessarily inherently bad, but obviously that means that they may just randomly have some games, that they end up losing because it's a young team. I
Sure.
mean, they did win a lot of key games last year at different points, which is what got them to 40 wins. But then they also had some games that they kind of blew, because they were a young team, right? And they could have had more than 40 wins potentially. But um, either way, also I think their coach Mark Dagnall, right? He seems like he's done a great job there.
Yes.
In terms of maximizing what he has, because again, I don't think it's very easy, to be a competitive roster with, what they had last year. Not that it was a bad, horrible roster, but again, they had like no size. They
They
basically
overachieved. I thought it was a great season for them.
right. Yeah, it's kind of similar to Utah and a couple of those other teams last year where they overachieved. And, again, I think having a really good coach who understands what he has in his players and how to get the best out of them, that can go a long way into making it a better roster.
Yeah.
So, um, again, like obviously that's an issue. And then also I think, you're just the other weakness, I guess, again, which is similar to the youth part, is just some of these guys may be potential gambles. Also in terms of health, right? With Holmgren, he missed all of last year, and that's kind of already been a concern, for him coming in, right? Is can he consistently stay healthy? Obviously, we got to wait to see what he does once he's actually on the NBA floor.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, it's not great, right, to have your first, season of your career, not even begin, right? Because
Yeah.
he had injury, but we have seen this in the past with other
Embiid,
players. Embiid missed his first two seasons. Blake Griffin, I think, missed his first season. Ben
Ben
Simmons,
Simmons. Yep.
yeah, Ben Simmons missed his first season, and there's other examples as well. And again, most of those guys we mentioned, went on to have terrific careers. I mean,
Yep.
again, you had Embiid win an MVP, right? Ben Simmons was an All NBA guy or All Defense.
Mm-hmm.
Blake Griffin was an All NBA guy. So,
Right.
um, so obviously you don't want to write a guy off after his rookie season where he doesn't play at all.
Sure.
But it is something, of note. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
Oklahoma,
something you need to keep your eye on.
yeah,
Durability is always a question.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, like for the most part, I mean, you could say, for the most part, they had a pretty good stroke of, durability for, most of their core guys.
Right.
But obviously, like at the same time, you also had some guys miss some time, right? Like Gideon Dort played 70 plus games, so that's good, right? Shea played in 68. I think some of those were just not playing in back-to-backs or whatever, or kind of like load managing. Right, Jalen Williams played 75, right? So their core guys all basically played about 70 games or so.
Right.
Isaiah Joe played 73 games. But then you look at some of these other guys, right? Like, Kenrich Williams, only 53. Pokashevsky, only 34, right? We already mentioned with Chet, didn't play at all. Um, so, there's room for improvement there. But again, like, because their core guys played so many games, you do kind of wonder, do they miss some more time?
Hmm.
And again, like, I know that sounds like beating a dead horse at times, but, again, durability and health is kind of an important thing when you're kind of,
It's a huge factor.
yeah, when you're projecting how well a team's going to do. Because again, you look at last year and their core guys were pretty durable. But if one of those guys had played like 60 games instead of like 70 plus, right, then that kind of changes the math.
Sure.
Um, but still, regardless, either way, this should be a team that I think should take a step forward. I do think we have to be careful in terms of like, projecting how big of a leap they're going to take. Because, I think now that everybody's kind of all in on this team, there may be a point where there may be like too much hype, you
Sure.
know, to where they don't necessarily deliver. But either way, regardless, they should still be in a similar spot to where they were last year, if not better, right? Where they're in the play-in firmly, competing for a playoff spot, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they'll be a top 6 seed, but I
No.
do think they should at the very least be a play-in team.
Right.
Um, but either way, it's tough because then that means somebody, right? Because we talked about, we think Dallas will be a play-in playoff team, right? So that means somebody's going to have to go. Somebody's going to have to drop out of that top 10, in order for a team like Oklahoma City to get in and compete.
Right.
But
But I think
that's
they're the team that can pull off an upset, though. That
yeah,
wouldn't surprise me.
right, because that's the other factor is now they have that experience of being in the play-in and being in a competitive game, and they won the first game in a close match. Then in the second game, they got their butts kicked by Minnesota, right? So they kind of know what it's like to be on both sides of that, competition.
Right.
Imagine now with what should be an improved roster, right? With the young guys getting better, and you get back the number 2 pick, you should be better, right? Because now you're
Absolutely.
more well equipped, to deal with whatever problems you had last year, right? You're gonna have more size, you're gonna have better talent overall. So this should be a better team. I don't know if standings wise they'll be much better, but either way, like I think you'll feel more legit about their chances of, like you mentioned, upsetting a team, right?
Right.
Could they be like again in a similar situation to where they were last year, where they were one of those playing teams, but then they actually get in as an 8th seed, right? And take somebody out that's above them, right? Like maybe they play a team like a Dallas, or a team like a Minnesota that's in the play in or something like that, and then they knock them out, and then they're in there as the 8th seed. That could happen. And
Yeah.
I don't think they'll win a playoff series, just because I think they're so young, but they could certainly be a scary first round opponent, I think, for a lot of teams. Because again,
Absolutely.
obviously because they're young, they're gonna have energy, they're gonna play hard, and they have good players. So, you factor in all that, and that could be again, they could take like, a 2 seed or a 1 seed, to the brink. It could be like, 6 or 7 games maybe.
Right.
Doesn't mean that they're gonna win, right? But they're at least gonna make you sweat and they're gonna make you work for those, for those victories in the playoffs. Because again, they're guys now, obviously they have guys that are really good and want to compete and want to win. So because of that, right, they're already going to be a team that you're not going to want to face when you play them, right? They're no longer a team that you just kind of like mark as a win on your schedule. Now they're at a point where you have to realistically compete against them, right, at a high level. And
Right.
again, I think that can extend to the playoffs if they get there. Like I said, I don't think they'll win a playoff series, because again, I just don't think they'll be as good as the top teams, like as the top seeds, and I don't think they'll be a top seed unless something crazy happens. But
Sure. I agree.
regardless, if they get into the playoffs and they, have a competitive series, that's a successful season in my book. So,
Yeah.
and I think they can get there. I don't
Yeah.
like. I don't think they'll win a matchup in the playoffs, but I think they can get there and push somebody. And if you're Oklahoma City, I think you'd have to look at that as a success because you'll
Yeah.
still have other picks coming from other teams, regardless of how good or bad you do.
Yeah. And then, like, for me, I think when I look at OKC, they're such an interesting team because I think they can, definitely better than Utah. They're definitely better than Portland at this point. Houston, I think they're better than as well, and San Antonio as well. And that's just because of the fact that they do have Shea, and they're, like you said, they're going to continue to get better. And, the young guys are going to be even better than they were last season. But, my thing is, I think this is going to be a team, that we see in the play in. And they'll probably, because they went out sad in the play-in last season, and everybody knows that. They won one game, then they lost the second one. That's cool. But now I think they'll win both play-in games, get to the first round, and then they'll probably be done there. And I think that's just due to the roster limitations in terms of age, youth experience, all that stuff. And it's like they did get better in a sense, and I think they will be better. But the problem is, and this is kind of the trend that we've talked about, the entire Western Conference has gotten better as well. So just because they're better doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily be a top seed or anything like that. I think they're going to still be towards the bottom half of this conference, but that doesn't make them a bad team by any means. I think there's teams that have definitely finished, towards the bottom that we know are pretty decent, but it's just because the competition is so thick in the West. But
Yeah.
something special is definitely percolating in OKC for sure. I think down the line and years to come, if they can hang on to, Shea and definitely Chet as well, I think, OKC fans are in for a very, 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 very promising future because, I mean, like this guy is just putting up insane numbers. SGA, that is, he was almost, an MVP, but you can't be MVP with a record like that. But, he's just played phenomenal. And I think, this is a team that can do well. But I don't want to place too many heavy expectations on them this season. Like I said, I think that they're probably going to be a first round exit team, but definitely a play-in standout.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's how I look at it. I just think that they're a team that I think you got to watch out for. That, like I said, can improve upon last season by
Absolutely.
actually getting in the playoffs. I just don't, like you said, I just don't think that they're going to be able to win a first round matchup against a really good team. I just think
Sure.
that that's going to be tough. Because again, they still have to prove, that they're ready, to make that next jump, right?
Yeah.
Because we saw what they did last season, but now everybody knows that they're coming, right? So now they have to, continue to improve on that and show like, hey, we are here,
Yeah.
and we're ready to, take anybody on. Like I said, I think that they will be a play-in team, and I think that they can make the playoffs. I think with the play-in matchup, it's gonna be, again, some of that's gonna be dependent on who they face, but at the same time, it is one game. It's a one-game matchup against the team, and anything can happen in
Yep.
one game, as we saw, with last year's or last season's playing games, right? Because you know, the Lakers Minnesota one, we thought that the Lakers were going to win that game and they did, right? But for much of the game, we weren't sure, right? It looked like
Exactly.
they might, that they could have lost that game, right?
Right.
I think most people thought New Orleans was going to beat Oklahoma City, even though Zion, in fairness, didn't play. But then, right, Oklahoma City won, and then I'm sure some people probably, based off of that mojo, thought they'd take care of Minnesota, especially because Minnesota was missing some guys. But no,
Right.
Minnesota basically destroyed them. So I mean, and again, that's where like I said, things like youth and inexperience kind of take stage. But
Hmm.
again, I think that they've improved on that here, so I think they are ready to take that next step.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't think they'll be an upper tier team.
No,
Like
no,
you said,
no,
I
no.
think they'll be in that lower spot, but they'll be there. And like I said, there's definitely a high probability that they will upset a team that's higher than them for that final 8th spot, right? Because that can definitely happen. I'm like, because
The
again, we know.
highest they can go is the eighth, I think, but
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
could
because
just
in
be
a
me.
one game scenario, right? Again, if they're 9-10 and then they win that first matchup and they win that second matchup, right? Then they're 8. And like I said, that can definitely happen. Um, you know, because again, like the teams that are going to be in that spot, they'll probably be closer to, in terms of talent. Because again, they have a guy that is capable of, winning you games.
Right.
Uh, Jake Gilgeous-Alexander, right? He can take over games, and impact it, right? Especially with his scoring down the stretch late in games, right? He can get a shot from basically anywhere. And you need a guy like that if you're going to be trying to win, close games, right? Because again, we saw that in the playoffs as well, right? With a team like, say, Denver, they had two guys, right, that could pretty much get off whatever shot they want. And obviously, you got to defend as well. And I think
Hmm.
Oklahoma will be equipped to handle that just because of the size and length they have.
Right.
Um, but you also, again, you got to be able to do both down the stretch, and I think they'll be able to do that against those lower tier teams in the play-in. Just because, again, in a single game elimination style, I think that's a team that you really got to pay attention to.
Yep. They're closer to that college level, and that's the environment that a lot of them did play in.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because that's what made them so interesting last year, right? That's
Hmm.
some people did gamble on the idea of them potentially being the 8th spot. They didn't get there, right? But they had a
They were
chance. They had
close.
exactly. Um, So that's kind of how I look at it, right? Because again, like I think both you and I like this team a lot.
Yes, we do.
It's just, yeah, it's just a matter of you also have to be, realistic, with the expectations. Because again, I think we expect them to be better. But obviously we don't expect them to be like an actual, title contender or anything
No,
like that.
no, no, no.
But again, I think that they're going to take a step forward, and I think people will, realize like, yeah, this is a really good team.
Absolutely.
Um,
I think
you
they're
know,
going to be put on the map even more than they already are right now. So I think they're going
exactly.
to have
So
a good season.
exactly, yeah. Because again, again, we don't incur, we don't do sports betting or anything over here, right? But a
Hmm.
lot of the over have them at 44.5 wins, right? So again, that's a little better, right, record wise than what they were last season because they
Hmm.
were 40, 42, right? So they could get to 44, 45. And again, when they have the over unders here, right? Nuggets, Suns, Warriors, Lakers, Clippers. So that's five. Grizzlies 6, Mavericks 7, Wolves 8, Kings 9, Pelicans 10, and then Oklahoma City at 11, right? So that, but again, right, the last 4 or 5 teams, they're all at 44.5.
Right.
So I mean, that basically means that they think like, yeah, like these teams are all in a similar tier, right? Dallas, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Sacramento, Minnesota. They think that they're in that tier and that any one of those teams could be in those spots, right? Because again, I mentioned Oklahoma City where they're at 11, but again, it's the same over under as Dallas, right? Who's 4 spots ahead of them, right? So
Yes.
that's basically like 7. So again, and I think that's about where we expect, somewhere in that 7 to 10 spot, right? Somewhere like that in the
Yep.
play-in.
Yeah.
So
7 to 10 is definitely
yeah,
their
so
baseline.
exactly. So I think yeah, because they should be about at the same spot, but
Hmm.
they should be better record wise.
Right.
So I guess to kind of put a bow on it, right? What grade would you give Oklahoma City for the offseason they had? And obviously, they didn't do any free agency moves in terms of really signing anybody.
Right.
Of significance, like I mentioned, other than the guy from Europe. But again, we don't just look at free agency, right? It's the whole offseason. So that
Yeah.
includes draft, free agency, trades, all of that, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So what grade would you give them?
Yeah, I'm gonna be very cautious with this one. I'm gonna give them a B.
Yeah.
I think this was a solid offseason for them. They couldn't really do too much. Like you said, they're not a big free agency market team. But in the trades that they have made, I think they've done fairly well. They got Bertans, and then they also got Oladipo as well. Albeit we don't know if Oladipo is really going to play. And then in the draft, great job by picking up Case and Wallace. I think he looks like a standout for definitely like a backup position. And then yeah, that's pretty much all I can really say. And I think they also picked up Keontae Johnson to a two-way contract, so not bad at all. And they didn't really lose anything. This is a team that I think also is looking for so much internal improvement from their top guys such as Shea, Giddy, and then also Chet coming back is a huge win. And then you have some other young guys like Trey Mann. He looked pretty good in the summer league as well. So I think this roster is young. They're hungry. Like I said earlier in the podcast, something special is percolating, in OKC, and just can't wait to see it. But I think this is a good start, um, to their next few years. So
Yeah, like I said, I definitely agree with you. I think I think a B range is about right because again, like you mentioned, they had a really good draft in terms of bringing in Wallace. They didn't really bring any amazing free agents in, right? But again, you got a little bit more flexibility, right? Moving draft picks around, right? They
hmm.
brought in Bertans again. Probably not going to do a whole lot. Oladipo, same thing. But again, right? Like you mentioned, it was a good draft pick.
Yeah.
Um, you know, they brought in a couple of guys, right? Like I mentioned, the overseas guy. And then you're also getting Chet back. I mean, that's
Yes.
kind of cheating, and I'm not saying that like that's actually part of their offseason. But
Something to look
again,
forward to.
exactly, it's something to look forward to. Because again, like most of what you're projecting is based off of the guys already on the roster. Because again,
Sure.
it's primarily a young team. They didn't really sign a whole lot of guys or trade for a ton of guys in free agency. So there wasn't really a whole lot they could do, in terms of transactions. But I think in terms of the draft, that's pretty good. So like I said, I'd probably give them a B, just because again I like the draft pick. And either way, I think it's a good idea to trade for guys like Oladipo or Bertans, even if they don't actually play,
Right.
or even if they're not or even if they're not one of those like veteran locker room guys. They're also like potentially like maybe that salary that you can move to take on some other contract or get some more picks. Right? We know Oklahoma City loves to trade for draft picks. So I mean, it just gives you flexibility. So I think they set themselves up really well. I don't think they did anything where I'm like, yeah, this is a dumb move.
No,
So I
not at
guess
all.
I would give them a B, given what they had to work with, right? So
Yeah.
I'm pretty much right with you.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I guess also like one more thing to add, right? So the schedules are out, right? You can go on websites and look at, the strength of the schedule, positive residual .com. That's a website you can look at. Their strength of schedule is basically like right around average, right? Because it's
Mid
like
tier.
13th or 15th or whatever. So
Yep.
basically that means that their schedule is relatively, mid, I guess, mediocre
Yeah.
in the sense of like it's not too difficult, not too hard, right? So that pretty much means that um, the likelihood that they have a really good record early on might be high because again,
Right.
like because if their schedule is average, right, there's no real point where they have like a crazy stretch, or I guess in fairness, you could also argue they don't have like a super easy stretch as well. But considering there's not like a lot of ebbs and flows, it's possible if again, I haven't seen all the games they play throughout. But if they get off to a good start, right, then that's probably a good sign, that they're gonna, be, that they're gonna take a decent jump forward next season.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, now I guess we can wrap it up with the news rumors. So I guess the first one, right, is, we'll get into the second one in a second, right? But the first one is Giannis talks Bucks extension, right? So basically he was being asked about, the possibility of him, signing an extension because that's gonna come up, I think, within the next year or so, because I don't think he has too much longer. I think he signed through the 24-25 season with a player option in 2026.
Right.
So he'll be eligible for an extension pretty soon. I mean, like, I think it's like within like the next year or so, right?
I think
Actually, I
so.
think it's in September. My bad. It's in September.
Okay.
But most people don't think he's gonna sign one if he does until next season, which makes sense.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't think that's anything to worry about.
yeah, and his quote was, "As long as we're on the same page with that, and you show me, and we go together to win a championship, I'm all for it." Based, so must see the dynamic. So I guess in a way, he's kind of giving himself an out because again, we know Milwaukee had a pretty bad end to their season last year. I know Giannis was hurt, right? But they went out in the first round in 5 to the Miami Heat. And their offseason, and again, obviously we'll get into it once we get to the Bucks, right? But
Yeah.
again, like they didn't do any drastic stuff. I mean, they brought guys back. Um, but again, they're gonna kind of have to show, the last season was pretty fluky. And again, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it probably was just because of the Giannis injury and Middleton wasn't 100%. But again, there are some real questions about long term, what the Bucks are going to be capable of, right? They
Right.
fired the coach, so clearly they thought that that wasn't working, despite him winning a championship a couple seasons ago.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously with a new coach, we'll see where it goes. But it is something to keep in mind. It is something to just, keep track of and think about just because, again, you just never know, right? If Milwaukee has another off season where they're not really, competing real, for the title, right? Where they go out early in the first or second round, right? I'm out of there. We'll see. But for now, I think everybody's probably going to be fine. Because again, like
Yeah.
I think most of them feel like, yeah, we had a ton of injuries, bad luck. Let's see what we can do next season. I don't think anybody's there yet in terms of we're done, right?
No.
That's not there.
And like for me, I think, at times Giannis is the best player in the league, like I said, at times. Um, but it's just interesting to hear that from him. I like you said, it sounds like he's giving himself like a little bit of a way out, little bit of wiggle room, kind of like a
Yeah,
safety net. But you know, I think as long as he's on that roster, you shouldn't be going out in the first round. Simple as that. So I'm sure there have been changes, with the coaching staff now. So I think it'll be good for them, but I don't think he's going to be on the run anywhere anytime soon. And all he wants to do is to win. That's what I really pull from this quote is that he just wants to win and everyone wants to be on the same page. So simple
right.
as that.
And that's kind of interesting, just because again, when you rewind a year ago, right, he was kind of considered the undisputed best player in the league, and he had been
Sure.
considered, for a little bit, right, the last what 2-3 seasons or so. But now I guess with Denver winning the title right now, you see a lot of people kind of moving on to saying like Jokic is the best player.
Right.
But I do think the Bucks will be primed to have a bounce back year. But again, in terms of if they're healthy, but that's been the biggest problem, right? Is they've had back to back seasons where something happened, and then before you know it, they're out earlier than you would have expected, right? Two
Mm-hmm.
seasons ago, right? They lost to the Celtics. Chris Middleton was hurt in the first round and never came back, right? And
Right.
then last season, right, he was in and out of the lineup. Really, all three of their stars were in and out of the lineup. But especially Middleton, obviously. Um, and then they go out in the first round, right, which is kind of even worse, right?
Right.
But hopefully, right, they have a healthy year, and kind of just bounce back. And I think they will bounce back. and kind of show like, again that hey, last year was a fluke. We're one of the best teams in the league. We're right there with everyone else. I think that will happen. We'll see what the new coach Adrian Griffin will do, but regardless, I do think last season was pretty fluky. Even though, again, I will say in fairness, I do think that there were some flaws with the roster that were kind of exposed. That I don't necessarily know if they corrected, but we'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I think there was a lot of work to be done. And I think they have handled it somewhat, but like you said, we'll probably save that for when we do talk about the Bucks.
And then obviously, moving on to the next one, right? So according to the Lakers, right, they've announced that they're going to unveil the Kobe Bryant statue, right, on February 8th. So, obviously you're watching this on Friday. But the day we're recording it Thursday, right? That's Kobe Bryant Day, right?
Yes.
August 24th. The day before, right, was his birthday, August
Hmm.
23rd. And so now the statue is coming, right? Because it's been talked about, right? Everybody knew it was going to happen eventually, but that is kind of cool that they announced it on, again on Kobe Day, right?
Yes.
Obviously, he's one of the greatest players, to pick up to ever play basketball, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the greatest Lakers in Laker history, right?
One of the most influential players of all time as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. I think most would say the greatest Laker, right? Some may
Hmm.
say others, right? But regardless, he's one of those guys that deserves a statue, right? I
Yes.
went to the crypto.com arena, in December of last year, right? And I saw like, all the statues that they had of the Laker players, right? There was
Right.
Elgin Baylor, Kareem, right? Jerry West, Shaq was there as well,
Yes.
right? So, all these guys. And now Kobe will be joining that as well. I'm curious to see like, what pose they have. Um,
Good
for his
question.
statue, right? Because Shaq has like the two-handed dunk, where
Right.
he's hanging on the rim, right?
Yes.
Kareem has the sky hook. So everybody's
It's got
got
to be
kind
a
of like
fade.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Everybody's got some iconic pose that they have. I think Dirk's statue, I think he's doing the fade as
Yeah,
well,
he's
right?
doing the one-legged fade, I think. Yep.
The one-legged fade. So I think that's probably what you should, get for the Kobe one. Because again, that's kind of considered like his, go-to most iconic shot, the fade away.
It would be interesting if they chose one, where it's like maybe a post game because he has some iconic post game
Yeah, that's
poses
true.
as well. A lot of pictures of him,
Yeah,
holding the trophies or even pulling his jersey to the left.
yeah,
I think it was. So
right.
it would
Yeah,
be interesting.
yeah, it will be interesting. I feel like it probably will be an in-game
I think so as well.
pose, but we'll see. And it is kind of funny, right? I don't really want to mention this necessarily,
Sure.
but 2K24, right? Obviously, NBA 2K24, they're doing a Mamba thing as
Oh
well.
yeah, the
Kind of
Mamba
odd,
moments.
yeah, kind of odd how the 81 point thing is left out, but
Yeah, that's stupid.
yeah, but and it's odd because I think online I saw some people were saying like, well, maybe that might just be too difficult of a challenge. But I think the 62 points through three quarters is in there as well, and I don't think that would necessarily be that
Yeah,
easy.
I don't know.
81 point game is kind of considered one of his most iconic moments.
And we've
That's
all done it in my career, so it shouldn't be that big of a challenge, but
yeah,
it is what it
I'm
is. But in
yeah,
terms of the statue, I think it's a great idea. And I think honestly, whether, he would have passed or not, I think he would have gotten a statue
yeah,
regardless. We're seeing
right,
all the greats get them. So, I'm
yeah,
just glad that they are actually doing it and have
right.
unveiled it.
And
Um,
again,
so
it's
yeah,
also in 2024, right? And
right.
24, that's one of
It's
his jersey
right.
numbers. So I guess I feel like a lot of it was probably planned, but like you said, it is kind of a shame that he doesn't
I
get to
know.
see it.
Rest in
But
peace, man.
right, exactly. To one of the greatest to ever play. So I
Yes.
mean, and then finally again, I guess semi more Dame Lillard stuff.
Oh joy.
Yeah, basically he was on a video and confirmed his trade request where he said I would just prefer not to speak about the Blazers. He said I can say that there was a trade request and I would just prefer not to speak on the Portland Trail Blazers. He was being interviewed by Mark Spears of
Okay.
Anscape. So, but at the same time, we've also still heard, yeah, Portland doesn't really want to do that, but
Right.
just more back and forth, right? Same stuff as before.
As to
Nothing
be expected.
there have been some rumors that it'll probably pick up more during training camp, but
Right.
who knows at this point? It just kind of comes down to again, right? Is there any other team that's going to step up to the plate? And if not, then I guess we'll have to see whether or not Portland ends up kind of just eating to Lillard's demands.
Yeah, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if Lillard actually ends up playing. That would be kind of interesting. But, I honestly hope that he doesn't play. I hope that they do move him somewhere that makes him happy. Um, because you don't really want a disgruntled player on your team. I don't think that's good for the morale, and you're
Yeah.
definitely probably not going to win games. So,
Yeah, and I think for Portland, you're also well equipped just because again you got Scoot,
yeah,
you
you're
have some
good.
other solid young players.
Yes.
So I think there is a way where obviously you want to get as much back as you can for Lillard. I'm not saying you should just take a garbage deal,
Right.
but I think you are better equipped to handle not getting back great return because you're not getting back 100 cents on the dollar anyways for Lillard. You're just not. That never happens with any um you know trade when you trade away a top whatever player, right? That
Right.
just right even AD, right? I think a lot of people consider that to be like one of the biggest hauls, for a star player, of recent memory. And even then, right? Like look at what New Orleans got, right? It was Lonzo Ball,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who's no longer on the team anymore, and they didn't get anything back for moving him to Chicago.
Right.
Brandon Ingram was obviously terrific. Josh Hart, who's not on the team anymore. I guess they replaced him with CJ McCollum, which is,
Right.
it's fine. And then a bunch of picks, right? And again, those picks were okay, right? But what was it? It was like um what was it? It was Jackson Hayes, who I think they got from Atlanta because I think the Laker
Yes.
picked to Atlanta, and then I think they swapped with New Orleans or something
Yes.
like
I
that.
think you're
Jackson
correct.
Hayes, who's not on the team anymore. Dyson Daniels, who will probably be a solid player, right? But for right now, he's still a young guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, who else was it? Who else was it that they got in those picks in that
I
from that?
I think that might have been it.
Yeah, yeah, and then they also had this year's thing, right? But they didn't even get it because it was a pick swap, but there was no point because the Lakers finished with a better record. So
Exactly.
like even then, right? Like I guess yeah, you got back good stuff for AD, right? But like still,
And like
you know,
with Portland,
yeah,
they have such an interesting case because their guard room is already so strong with or without Damian Lillard.
and that's why they don't want Hero.
Exactly.
There's no real point in having him when you already have other guards, right? Like Scoot, Simon, Shaden Sharp, who I guess can kind of play both the two and the three.
Right.
Just not a whole lot of room for Hero, and you don't really want to, necessarily be paying that guy a max deal while
Heck
your team,
no.
yeah, while your team is going to be rebuilding. I mean,
No.
obviously you got to give the money to somebody, but if you can, you'd rather reroute him to another team. Like people have mentioned, not that this is going to happen at this point, right? But like say Brooklyn, right, where they're a team that has, I guess a better reason sort of to have a guy,
I
that makes a
I would
decent
think
amount
so,
of
yeah.
money. Yeah, but a team like Portland is in a complete rebuild, right?
Right.
Where like they're starting kind of in a way from scratch. So, or they're gonna
Pretty
be starting.
much.
Yeah, but obviously, again, you got a great building block with Scoot, so we'll see what happens. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it feels like we're kind of just running around in circles at this point, right? Because
Yeah.
we thought that this would probably get wrapped up, not necessarily immediately, but I don't know if we
Quicker than
necessarily.
it has.
Yeah, but I guess we also have to remember last year we went through Durant and Kyrie, right, asking for trades in the summer, and then they don't get traded until almost the last possible moment. So I
Pretty
mean,
much.
but again, those are different situations. Because Brooklyn was competitive with those two guys on the roster while they were there. I don't think Portland will be that good of a team. But we'll have time before we get to them anyway, right? Because we still
Right.
got other Western Conference teams to do. But either way, right? That's the Lillard update, I guess, for this week, I suppose.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, like we mentioned at the beginning, right, the KJ McDaniels interview, right? NBA player KJ McDaniels, right? We did do an interview with him last week, right? That video is obviously still up and out there, so be sure to check it out if you haven't, right? I think he gave a lot of great insight, on his experience, his journey, in the world of professional basketball.
Yes.
And again, we also continue to appreciate the support we get from the likes in the comments, right? Comment your thoughts about what you think about what we thought about Oklahoma City's offseason, right? Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. So let us know. Give us your takes on, the Kobe statue report, right? Maybe the Lillard trade request. Again, just continue to let us know in the comments. So either way, thanks for listening. Have a great weekend and we'll see you next week.